All right, folks, welcome to Awful Bash Scripts. We're going to be talking about the pros, cons, some things that you might like, some things that you don't like. Basically, I'm here to not bash. I'd like to talk to you about some things that I like about Bash, some things that you might like about Bash, some tips, some tricks, things that I've learned over my past 20 years working with Bash, unfortunately. So how it all started was basically me with an Amiga 500, learning Amiga Basic. I went on from there to learn like DOS5, that kind of stuff. So as you can tell, like a shell scripting language is going to be so much better than Basic, but I still have a lot of those roots stuck in me. So essentially, shell scripting is like an easy way to get something done quickly. Bash is the one that I use because it runs in a lot of places. But honestly, a lot of the times you'd probably be better suited with something like Python or Ruby. But if you need something like portability, Bash is going to be your friend. So some cons with Bash are the syntax, the variables are strings, escaping. You've got some weird syntax like kcsac and if5, those reversals there, and you can do some pretty awful things with Bash, which can be handy. You can quickly iterate through CLI loops. You can pipe to pipe to pipe. You can do brace expansion. There's lots you can do with Bash just to get things done quickly in order to iterate on what you actually want to get done, which is really, really handy when you're in time crunch or when you need to do stuff. So lessons learned is like, don't make your Bash script too long. Make sure that you have errors. Please log out when you can. Make sure that you have that you sit down with the people who are taking over Bash scripts that you've written. And basically, when you're writing Bash in anger, make sure that you leave like a paper trail for yourself. So in terms of some tips, I guess I kind of went over the lessons learned there, but basically make sure that you add comments, make sure that you follow like a path that somebody else has been on, use a boilerplate or a template when you can, and try to avoid tricks. So if it looks kind of fancy, or if you're doing something pretty cool, or it looks like you might be getting into Bash golf territory where you're trying to get things smaller and smaller in your artisanal Bash code, maybe try to avoid those. So what you might love about Bash is like, hey, you can make TUIs pretty easily using something like Dialog or Whiptail, that kind of stuff. So if you actually want to make something that runs both in Bash and in a GUI, that's actually pretty handy. You might also remember a couple one-liners, that kind of stuff that stay in your head, but you might not love, or the weird things like shelling out to awk or Perl or other languages, trying to remember things like the colors, like the 31M here, the odd case statements with menus, that kind of stuff. But what I've been doing over the years is actually starting to share my Bash scripts, so keeping them out in public. So I use this repository, Awful Bash scripts, so I put them in there. You can tell, the evolution since I started this. Some of them don't even have like the user bin end Bash at the top, like they're missing the shebang, right? So I've definitely gone through a lot of stuff. But in terms of testing, which is one of the most common complaints, remember that you can actually install bats. So if you're on something like Linux or Mac, you can use Linux Brew or Homebrew to actually install that. And also there's something called shell check that allows you to do linting. Now, I work at Datadog as a tech evangelist, and this is our installer. You can tell even in here, there's some stuff like the backticks instead of the $ parens syntax can come up. And specifically, that's something called like POSIX compliance. Now, it's not necessarily something you need to do, but a lot of people will do this in order to target portability, which isn't necessarily what POSIX does. But in this case, you can say if there's no exceptions, you should never be doing this, right? So some advice here, like I'm not going to read all of these, but basically what you want to do is apply the same sort of rigor to Bash scripts that you're using in, say, your pipeline, or that you might be using to run updates on multiple servers, that kind of thing. You want to apply to your Bash scripts as well. And further, I've mentioned this a couple times as well, but it deserves its own slide. So you need to have comments, and specifically, it'd be great if you had comments that describe the why instead of just the how or the what. Now, to-do, if you've got to-dos in your script, I would suggest maybe fixing those. And if they can't be fixed in Bash, maybe picking a different shell scripting language, or possibly making an actual app for this. Now, not to do is like, hey, don't publish stuff that's terse, really difficult to understand, doesn't have any comments, like kind of stuff. No to-do list is good without a not to do, but you want to avoid those pitfalls. So things where you can basically cause yourself pain in the future, like cause it to actually be difficult to go over. Now, in conclusion, I've got the solution for the verse script there. So if you actually want to do something like grep, but actually keep stuff at the end, you can use this lesser than. I've got a bunch of links in here. Hopefully the slide stays up longer for you to grab them, but also publish these so that you can actually get access to the links. But essentially, make sure you're linting, make sure you're testing, go through the awesome bash, go through the pitfalls, go through the beginner's guide, and look at the bash cookbook. I'm Ryan. Hope you're having a great day and take it easy.